All right. Thank you for joining me in this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and we have another great debate for you tonight. I have Tom Jump and Joshua Pillows, man. We're about to jump into it. We're going to have an old-fashioned does the God of the Bible exist debate, and I'm sure this will be a great one, so I thank you for joining us. As always, I do want to go ahead and encourage you to like and follow The Gospel Truth. Make sure you hit that subscribe and that notification bell so you can stay in the loop with The Gospel Truth that's going on. You don't want to miss out on any shows that we have coming up here in the future, and the only way you can be able to stay in the loop is if you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss out. Also, all this content is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, not only on YouTube. All the videos are on YouTube, but you also connect with different information on those other platforms as well. So make sure that you are jumping on those other platforms and following and or subscribing. Also, if you just like the audio preferences is available. It's on podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. So make sure you are jumping on a podcast there and support the ministry with a subscribe there, and it helps you listen while you're on the go. All right, so that option is there for you. And as always, I do have a bunch of shows coming up here in the future that I want to make sure that you are aware of. All right, fix this real quick. And what I have coming up here in the future was Jesus fully God and fully man during his earthly ministry. I have Stanley Terry versus Ricky Caldwell, so make sure that you are staying in the loop for that debate. After that, Death Before the Fall, I have CJ Cox, Young Earth Creation, Robert Rowe, Theistic Evolutionist. So make sure you are jumping on this debate. It's going to be a great one. I always love creation debates, and this is going to be another fun one, all right? Then after that, we have this one jump back on the schedule. I know this one keeps getting shuffled around. We're really trying to get this done. I have David Powman and Matthew Wiersma, and they're going to jump on this innate knowledge of God, necessity for all other knowledge. All right, a good old presuppositional debate. So we're going to jump on this one. It's going to be fun. January 12th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then lastly, I have a big one coming up, and a lot of people are looking forward to this one. God possesses dynamic and omniscience? All right, Anthony Rogers versus Warren McGrew, and I want you guys to make sure you watch this one. It's going to be a very, very good debate, so make sure you are staying in lock and key for this debate. All right, so that's the next several shows coming up here on The God's Truth. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. All right, that said, I have Tom Jump. Tom Jump has been on the show for a number of times already. I think his most recent debate was with Matt Slick, I believe, that he came on and debated Matt Slick. Or was it? No, it may have been Pastor Ramos. I forget his name. Anyway, I forget. But Tom Jump's been on the show about 3 times. He actually, me and him had a little engagement. And this is when I first had The God's Truth going on, man. So at that point, Tom Jump obliterated me, right? So... But he came on, he did a great job. It was fun talking to him. And I have a newcomer to the show. I have Mr. Joshua Pillows, all right? If you remember Joshua, he was actually on Revealed Apologetics. He spent some time with Eli Ayala on that show. And the most recent discussion he had with David Powman on Eli Ayala's show, Revealed Apologetics as well. And I think he performed very well. He carried us very well. And I think he performed up to standards, man. So I'm hoping that he's able to perform up to standards tonight. I'm sure him and Tom will put on a great debate, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of ideas thrown back and forth. The important thing for you guys, the audience, make sure you guys are cordial in that live chat. All right, we understand that they're disagreeing partners, debaters here, and I want you guys to be nice to each other. And all right, that said, let me bring these guys in so they can further introduce themselves. What's up, guys? How y'all doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. What's up, Tom?
Not much. I'm doing all right. A little cold still.
All right, man. Well, I'm over here in Cali, man, so we're still experiencing some 70, 80-degree weather over here, man. And Joshua, you're over in Texas, right? You're getting that 80-degree heat still, huh?
Here and there. Hopefully not much longer.
Yeah,
I just got 8 inches of snow.
It's a tough one, man. Ty, you might want to move to Cali, man, or move to Texas, man. Don't come to Cali, man. Go ahead and move to Texas, get some more weather, man. Cali got issues, man. We got
some bad electrical grids, so
I think every state got their issues, man. Good stuff, guys. I appreciate you guys for coming on here. So before we jump into this debate, I'm gonna give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves to the audience. Let them know what you do, blogs, YouTube page, whatever you do. Let them know what you do, man. And start with Tom, man. Go ahead and give a quick introduction yourself.
I'm T-Jump. I run an atheist YouTube channel, youtube.com/T-Jump. I'm working on starting an atheist church, the goal of which is going to be decreasing the cost of living for as many people as possible, hoping to get a apartment building, and we're going to just decrease rent about 50% if possible, and go from there. So check out my YouTube channel, supporting the the Patreon so I can buy an apartment building and make people's lives better.
All right, cool, Tom. Thank you so much, man. All right, Joshua, you got it, man. Give a quick introduction to yourself.
Well, I am first and foremost a musician. I'm an organist at a Lutheran church, but I'm still Reformed. I teach piano, I teach music theory, and I compose as well. And so music's my primary focus. And then apologetics and philosophy, theology, all that sort of stuff comes after that. And so here I am as a secondary subject with a debate with Tom. So primarily a musician, and then apologetics as well.
All right, good stuff, guys. Excellent, excellent. All right, so we're going to jump into this debate. Once again, the topic is, does the God of the Bible exist? Josh, we're arguing the affirmative. Tom, you're arguing the negative. We're going to start that with 10-minute opening statements as we follow by 5-minute rebuttals. And then we're going to have a total of 40-minute cross-examination where both of you will get 20 minutes to lead with questions. And then we're going to have 5-minute closings and then some Q&A from the audience. Sounds good? All right, Joshua, you're arguing the affirmative, so you're up first, man. And let me know when you're ready, and then I will start I'll start my time when you begin to speak.
Okay. Well, in preparing for this debate tonight and watching Tom's videos, he makes relatively short opening statements. He's cut straight to the chase. However, I would like to take the majority of my time laying out my position just to avoid any ambiguities that may arise in my argument. First, the debate tonight will primarily be centered over worldviews and worldview considerations. Everybody, Tom as well as myself, has a system or a web of presuppositions or foundationally held beliefs by which they deduce the nature of reality, how we know what we know, and how we should live our lives. These presuppositions, or these foundational basic assumptions or beliefs, form the paradigm for one's outlook on life and how they should answer these philosophical questions. Second, it should be noted that entailed in a worldview, that is entailed in one's web of beliefs, is a metaphysical assumption about what reality really is outside of our internal convictions and considerations. Another way of putting it is that a worldview has both an epistemic aspect as well as a metaphysical one. Epistemically or conceptually, one holds tenaciously to their foundational presuppositions when arguing over the truth of their position. But they likewise must begin and end their position metaphysically. Reality really is this way, even if I didn't exist at all, one might say. With this in mind, we can see the inextricable link between metaphysics and epistemology. What one believes to be true about the nature of reality is determined by and determinative of one's theory of knowledge. Likewise, one's theory of knowledge is predicated on what one believes reality is. In the end, there are warring worldviews in conflict with one another. The penultimate question, then, is which worldview can make sense out of the intelligibility of human experience. My third point is that my argument tonight is a concrete, objective argument for the existence of God and the truths of Christianity. When considering which worldview can make sense out of intelligibility, I am therefore not referring to some subjectivistic answer to why my personal and private experiences are intelligible, but rather to an objective reference point by which I can deduce objective conclusions concerning intelligibility. In this respect, I concur with Van Til when he says, and I quote, "Christianity is the only position which is philosophically justifiable. It's the only rational, objectively valid position," end quote. Thus, the nature of the debate tonight, through the nature of the debate, answers will be expected for the foundational questions. Arbitrariness is not allowed. Moreover, internal holistic consistency will also be expected. Contradictions or internal inconsistencies delegitimize the validity of a worldview to account for such preconditions. In the end, there are thus three criterion I am arguing for that must be met in order to objectively justify the preconditions of intelligibility. 1, a worldview must not reduce to arbitrariness. 2, a worldview must not possess internal to it any contradictions or philosophical tensions. And 3, there must be an objective tether by which we can come to definitive and not speculative conclusions about the nature of reality. My fourth point is that when comparing worldviews, Van Til rightfully points out that the non-Christian's position is riddled with internal contradictions or tensions. And tonight I intend to expose them in my opponent's position as an illustration of the futility of holding to any other position than Christianity. Such questions will be as follows. Is reality ultimately one or many? If reality is comprised of both of these aspects, how does one bring these two things together? Is reality ultimately deterministic or indeterministic? If reality is comprised of both of these aspects, how does one bring these two things together? Is reality ultimately rational or irrational? Again, if there are aspects of both, how does one bring these two things together? Such is a daunting task for the unbeliever, who inevitably must begin with his finite and imperfect self and work outward to answer these types of questions. Fifthly, I intend to objectively prove the existence of God via a transcendental argument. That is, I will be asking what must be true in order to make sense of the preconditions of intelligible experience. It is important to note that transcendental arguments are not direct arguments. That is, I am not going directly to some empirical evidence or observation and then linearly drawing a line to conclude the existence of God. Nor am I starting with some general truth or axiom like the causal principle or in the Kalam argument, and then directly inferring that very probably the Christian God is the first cause. Rather, I am proving the existence of God indirectly by showing that the rejection of Christian theism reduces not just to absurdity, but to philosophical impossibility. You see, given the Christian worldview, I have answers to the philosophical questions that otherwise lead to tensions in the unbeliever's worldview. Reality is comprised both of a one and yet a many. There is one unifying factor, namely God, by which all other facts make sense, and God is both one and three. Or more narrowly, we could say that reality is classified into classes and particulars, a one universal or class governing all the particulars that are categorized under it. Reality is both deterministic and indeterministic. Deterministic in that God governs and controls all things that come to pass in his creation, and yet indeterministic in that man has a will to do what he wants. Broadly speaking, it is a will that is enslaved to sin. Narrowly speaking, nothing prevents me from willingly taking off pineapples off slices of pizza. Reality is ultimately rational because God has ordained all the facts to be what they are, as well as their relationships which make them intelligible. And yet reality is also, in a sense, irrational in that the objects outside of human experience don't possess rational faculties. Contra Hegel's metaphysical view, for instance, which says that the universe is rational or rationality. In this manner, the transcendentalist can positively formulate his worldview to prove that it is true. These truths being based off of God's inscripturated revelation, in transcendental circles one might call this an appeal to a verification principle. In this regard, one can directly prove the truths of Christianity. Indeed, we see this very process demonstrated by the Apostle Paul in his apologetic encounter with the Athenian philosophers in Acts 17. Van Til has simply given us added ammunition in employing a transcendental approach. While the direct aspect of appealing to scriptural revelation has been demonstrated and is faithful, my argument tonight will primarily be indirect in granting my opponent's position to be true for the sake of the argument, in order to show not only that his position inevitably reduces to subjectivism and skepticism, but also that he must assume the truths of Christianity in order to even argue against it. What must be true in order to escape egocentrism and therefore subjectivism and skepticism? What must be true in order to account for the uniformity in nature, both external to us as well as internal? The inductive principle, the causal principle, laws of logic and mathematics, a unification to the many particulars, what makes science possible, what makes sense of aesthetic judgments and human dignity, what makes sense of human consciousness and the ability to cogitate. The answers to such questions on a non-Christian position can only ever at best be speculative. Speculative because there is no objective tether to the one who has these answers, namely God. The task of starting subjectively with man and working out to the universe to answer these questions is nothing short of futility. By not acknowledging the creator-creature distinction, the creature must assume the role of the creator in organizing and interpreting every facet of our experience. Such a role is epistemologically futile. By now, it should be obvious that only a revelational epistemology, which acknowledges the creator-creature distinction, can save us from abject skepticism. To be sure, all men know that the God exists, their creator. As such, God has revealed himself not just through Scripture, but also through nature as well as innately, with us being made in his image. For these reasons, the unbeliever is afforded some degree of knowledge, but it is not a saving knowledge. To be clear, my argument is not that unbelievers don't know things. No doubt we have all benefited from the many contributions that unbelievers have made throughout history. The point, however, is that on their own principles, they could not make sense, out of knowledge to begin with. They must always and everywhere live off of borrowed capital from the Christian's worldview in order to argue against the Christian worldview. It is only because God exists that the unbeliever can reason at all, including reasoning against the existence of his Creator. Like a child sitting on his father's lap and slapping his father's face, he can only do so because his father is holding him up all the meanwhile. The proof of God's existence is that without God, you couldn't prove anything. The proof of the truth of Christianity is demonstrated by the impossibility of the contrary. Assume that Christianity is false, and one is reduced to subjectivism and skepticism. Knowledge is rendered unintelligible. Only Christianity provides the transcendentals, or the necessary preconditions, for the intelligibility of human experience. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Josh, for that. All right, Tom, you're up for your 10-minute opening statement. Let me know when you're ready, or let me know when you start speaking. I'll start my time. I think you're muted, Tom.
That was a joke because I was going to let you know when I started speaking, you know.
Okay.
But anyway, so his timer's still up. Is that a problem? Let's just wait for it to go out, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah, hold on one second. That's me.
All right.
All right, go ahead, and I got it.
Cool. So thanks for hosting this. Appreciate it as always. Happy to be here at the TGT. Thank you for Joshua Pillows for participating in the debate. Always appreciate opportunities to have these conversations. So the debate topic is, does the Christian God exist? The answer is no. And the reason we can know that is basic epistemology. In order to claim that something exists, I forgot to do that. In order to claim that something exists, you must have some way to differentiate the position that you're claiming and imagination. Everything starts as imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. That means no philosophical arguments can ever be evidence, because they're just, here's how I imagine things to be. And the way you imagine things to be doesn't count as real. It just the way you imagine things to be. So if you imagine your position to be the only one that's logically possible, it doesn't mean it is. It just means that that's all you can conceive of. That is your conceptual limitation, which is why presuppositionalism is not taken seriously in any field of philosophy. So in order to count as evidence, you need some way to differentiate imagination from reality. Philosophical arguments don't do that unless you're making claims about your own imagination. So you can't have presuppositional evidence of anything. Secondly, all of the features of reality can be explained perfectly well without a God. It's pretty easy to do, especially like for one of the things is the intelligibility of nature. All you need for intelligibility of anything is the capability of nature to produce minds which can imagine stuff and have that imagination correspond to reality. The only thing you need for that is the production of a mind, which can be done naturally just by evolution. Evolution can do that. So anything that can produce a mind that can imagine stuff has intelligibility. It's that simple. So we have intelligibility. You don't need a God at all for that. It's pretty simple. There's lots of ways to do it. Most of the questions, like, is there the one or the many? It just doesn't matter. It could be either one. It's fine. It doesn't make a difference. Is it rational or irrational? We know it's rational for a fact because I exist. That's all you need. I exist and nothing in the universe is making me not exist. Therefore, everything in the universe shares one property, which is A equals A. Gives us the basic laws of logic here. There is nothing in the universe that's making me not exist. Therefore, every part of the universe must follow the laws of logic. I exist. There you go. We now have the grounds of logic and a universals just based off of my own existence. You don't need a God for any of this. All God claims have been shown to be nothing but imaginary pretty much all throughout history. All of the, especially the biblical Christian God specifically, has been shown to be nothing but imaginary, as most of the claims in it are completely ridiculous. My opponent brought up that you need to have a worldview that doesn't have any internal consistencies, or I forget what the second word he used was, like internal tensions, I think, tensions or something like that. Like biblical theism, Christianity has like the most tensions and contradictions of anything. You just go to biblical contradictions, there's thousands of them. And the tensions, well, there's a talking donkey, a talking snake, a talking bush. God contradicts himself, mass murders a bunch of people. He sent bears to kill 40 children because they made fun of a bald guy. There are more contradictions and tensions in Christianity than pretty much any other worldview. So his own worldview fails his own standard. But more importantly, the fundamental reason why presuppositionalism necessarily fails is because they cannot in any way provide a coherent definition of knowledge and justification that their own worldview can live up to. They just kind of arbitrarily wing it and kind of decide that if I see it as a problem, then it's kind of a problem. And if I don't see it as a problem, it's not a problem, without creating any spot like any strict criterion that we can check things against. It's kind of just their feels. Presuppositionalists say, this feels like a problem to me, and this doesn't feel like a problem to me. Therefore, Christianity works and everything else doesn't, which is not how epistemology works. It's just begging the question. So in order for presuppositionalism to be coherent, you would first need to give a coherent definition of knowledge and justification with a set line of criterions that can be checked on both worldviews. Until you can do that, you simply pointing out many of the biggest problems in philosophy does not count as evidence against a worldview, because they also work against yours, and your imagined way that you think it solves them isn't a solution. We can arbitrarily assert there is a solution to any of the biggest problems in philosophy, and it will have equal credibility to the theist's assertion that Christianity can solve these. And again, until you can provide some way to differentiate imagination from reality. So I can conclude there, and I'll look forward to Joshua's presenting a clear definition of knowledge and justification.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. All right, so now we're going to jump into the old rebuttal round. All right, so we got 5-minute rebuttals. So Josh, you're up next for your 5-minute rebuttal.
Okay. Are we good?
Yep, you got it for 5 minutes.
Okay. I want everyone to notice the baggage that Tom is bringing here to the argument, to the debate tonight. He's given an argument, and I've given an argument as well. Tom says we can't differentiate between imagination and demonstration. But you see, that hasn't really been proven. Tom's asserted that, but why has he asserted that? He's asserted that because we have different worldviews. Again, I'm coming to the debate tonight with the Christian worldview, and we need to acknowledge the atheistic worldview or the agnostic worldview, whichever one Tom defines himself to be in. We need to define our worldviews with respect to one another. Tom says, well, we need to demonstrate imagination versus demonstration, but you see, that assumes a subjective or egocentric picture, metaphysical picture. But that's not my worldview. My worldview is I start with God and myself. I have God's revelation that tells me how reality is, how I know what I know, and he's revealed all of that stuff to me. That's my worldview. So I can differentiate between mere speculation and imagination and God of the gaps and all that sort of stuff. I can differentiate between imagination and demonstration because God has demonstrated it. He's revealed it to me. And so again, I want to point out the antithesis that's here and present between our conflicting worldviews. Tom says we need to define knowledge and justification. Well, to be fair, Van Til doesn't really define knowledge. Van Til comes from a very continental tradition, and so it's not very analytic. However, Bahnsen, his disciple or protege, does define knowledge, and we simply hold to a justified true belief definition of knowledge. What's justification? It's simply just having good reasons to believe something, to justify it, to demonstrate it. And so our definitions, there's nothing ambiguous in our definitions that we're giving. We hold to the same definitions. He wants to say, well, we find our own problems and we answer them, and then we just ignore other problems and we just shove them off and count them as illegitimate. Well, he hasn't demonstrated that either. I'm still waiting for some demonstration of that. But we can differentiate between imagination and demonstration. We can define knowledge. We can define justification. Because my worldview starts with God. I mean, I start with myself, of course. We have to all start with ourselves in order to know anything. But we also start with God because he's created us. We live in a universe that he's made and had us dwell in. And so we start with both. It's not just an egocentric picture where I start with myself, okay, and now I have to go out and answer the broad questions of epistemology and metaphysics and ethics and ontology and whatever else it may be. So on my worldview, I can differentiate between the two. I can save knowledge. I can save the idea of justification. But you see, Tom is right, because on his principles, on his worldview, he does have the problem of how do we distinguish between imagination and demonstration? Why? Because he has to start with himself and then work outward. Now, how, again, in my opening statement, I made the point how futile it must be to start with a subjectivistic starting point and then work outward to answer the tough philosophical questions. It's just simply futile. You can never do it. So Tom's right in asking the question, but he's wrong because he's not differentiating between the worldviews that are here and in conflict, the antithesis that's here. So on my worldview, again, I can save the preconditions of intelligibility. I can save knowledge. I can save science. I can save ethics, uniformity, and all the rest. I can differentiate between imagination and demonstration because God has revealed it to me. Tom also says the Christian worldview is full of inconsistencies and tensions. But again, I'm going to have to keep going back to worldview issues. On Tom's worldview, he sees contradictions and internal tensions in my worldview. And that's totally expected because he's an atheist. He's not a Christian. And of course, on my worldview, holding to Scripture as the final authority, I don't see any tensions at all. Okay, well, what do we do at that point? Well, Van Til says that the ultimate question is which worldview can account for the laws of logic to begin with. Tom's appealing to the law of non-contradiction in order to say my worldview is absurd or false, or however he may put it. But how does Tom account for the laws of logic to begin with? Is he just going to stipulate it as a brute fact and leave it at that because they have to exist? Well, I grant they have to exist, but the question is, how do they comport within his world and life view, his philosophy? To just say, well, they exist and I can use that as an axiom or whatever and see your position is wrong. Well, that's not an answer, because I'm asking for internal consistency. In my opening statement, I asked, no arbitrariness, no internal inconsistency. How can you save the preconditions of experience, of knowledge? What is your objective tether to the external world? How can we draw these objective conclusions? And Tom hasn't answered any of these questions. Granted, he's just given his opening statement. But I have answers to all these, and I'm asking everyone watching and for my opponent Tom to acknowledge the antithesis present, the worldviews in conflict with one another.
All right. Thank you, Joshua, for that rebuttal. All right, Tom, you're up for your 5-minute rebuttal.
So pretty much nothing he said there actually even addressed anything in my position, because I didn't say differentiate imagination from demonstration. I said differentiate imagination from reality, and he has to do that also. Like, every worldview necessarily has to do that, unless you think everything you imagine is 100% exact correspondence to reality. Like, I'm imagining a unicorn. If that's the case in your worldview, if you don't have to differentiate imagination from reality, then literally everything you imagine is reality, and my unicorn and the leprechaun in my head are equally as real as your God. And so clearly, your worldview also has to differentiate imagination from reality. Everyone in philosophy acknowledges, yes, you have to do that. Your definition of justification was good reasons. Okay, that's just begging the question. The whole point is, what are the good reasons? You have to give a formal description of what qualifies as a good reason versus a not good reason to give a definition of justification. Just saying good reasons doesn't tell us anything. That's just you saying, this is what I think a good reason is, and so I accept it, and I don't think yours is a good reason, therefore I don't accept it. So it's just begging the question, as I pointed out in my opening. I pretty much addressed most of the things he said in my opening. All of the things for the intelligibility can be explained purely well without a God. You don't need a God for that. All you need is a mind. If a mind was just randomly popped into existence from quantum mechanics, then poof, you now have intelligibility, because that's all that's required. All you need for intelligibility is a mind to exist that can think and has ideas, and those ideas correspond to reality. Those are all the only factors you need. So any reality that can produce minds which can think has intelligibility. He said I need to accept the laws of logic as axioms. Like, that's not anywhere in my position. I don't do that. So I don't know why he brought that up. It has absolutely nothing to do with my position. My position is that logic is a language created by people to describe reality, and we can know it's universal for the reason I listed in my opening. I exist, and absolutely nothing in all of reality is making me not exist, because if it was, then I wouldn't exist. Therefore, we can know universally the law of logic holds universally, because in all of reality, there is nothing making me not exist. So I can get all of logic just describing the way reality is. Don't need anything else there. It's not too hard. It's pretty simple, actually. He said that he doesn't see the tensions in the Bible because he accepts the Bible as the starting point. Well, I mean, that's called begging the question, basic circular reasoning fallacy. Doesn't quite, not a good justification. The Bible has quite a few problems, like a mustard seed being the smallest seed. There's just a factual inaccuracy right there. Oops. There's lots of factual inaccuracies. There's contradictions, like in Genesis 1:1, it says that the plants were created on the third day, and on Genesis 1:2 or Genesis 2, it says that no plants were created until after Adam and Eve. You got a problem there. That's called a contradiction. There are lots of contradictions in there that don't exist in science or philosophy or any of the actually reliable sources of knowledge we have. And again, all precepts do is point out some of the biggest problems in philosophy and arbitrarily assert they don't apply to their worldview, even though they do. It's been proven that they do. Logically, necessarily proven that they do. Not even God could escape the fact that they do. But they just claim to have a solution because they imagine it. They say, God does stuff, therefore solution to big problem. Like, no, it doesn't quite work that way. So any of the problems he presents that he thinks applies to my worldview actually applies to his. And so it's just self-defeating for him to present any problem in philosophy because they all apply to his own worldview. But yeah, I'm looking forward to his definition of justification, not just saying good reasons, but I need to know like what's the actual set of criteria that qualifies something as a good reason. And I will conclude there.
All right. Thank you both for those rebuttals. All right, so now we're going to transition to the cross-examination. Once again, cross-examination is just 40 minutes. Both of you will get 20 minutes to lead with questions. And in that, if you can answer yes or no to certain questions, let's do that. Let's not bog down the time of your opponent. All right, Joshua, you up first for your 20-minute cross-examination of Tom.
Tom, you accused me of begging the question by starting with the Bible as my ultimate authority. Is that correct?
Not quite. No. So I said you're begging the question when you said, what I said was that I said you have tensions in the Bible, and then you said there are not tensions in the Bible because you start with Christianity. That's begging the question. So I said I presented a problem, there are tensions, and you said the solution to this problem is that you start with the thing that has tensions. That's the circular reasoning.
Okay, and how do you know there are tensions in the Bible?
Logic.
Whose logic?
The universe's logic. Like the part when I said, like in Genesis 1 says the plants were created on day 3. Genesis 2 says not until after Adam and Eve. Logic.
Okay, so if you interpret it as a contradiction, and then someone else looks at it and interprets it as not a contradiction, well, what's the procedure at that point?
What's the procedure?
How do we rectify the problem if Tom jumps sees these verses in the Bible and says, oh, that's a contradiction, and then I go to someone else and they say, oh no, this is the explanation, there is no contradiction, what do we do at that point? How do we clarify the issue?
We point and laugh at them for being silly because they don't understand logic.
And if the other side does the same thing, what do you do?
We just correspondence to reality. So we can say, is it the fact that plants being created on the 3rd day and people being created on the 4th day, and then it says no plants until humans were, is that a contradiction? Yes. Okay.
But according to who?
Like we don't need like some kind of hardcore analysis of logic here. That's an obvious, Bible done screwed up here. If you want to like divulge into some debate about some paraconsistent logic in your worldview to try and make the Bible not logically contradictory, you can do that. It's just kind of a waste of time. Like any rational human being and rational God and rational anything is going to be like, yeah, plants created on the 3rd day, but then not until the 4th day is a contradiction. If you just want to deny that straight up and say that there's some kind of God logic out there, it's okay. I'm just going to point and laugh.
Okay, so you say any rational person would point out the contradiction, but my question to you now is, what constitutes a rational person? Do other people exist? And if so, how do you know?
Well, that has nothing to do with a rational person. So that's 2 separate questions, which I can have absolutely nothing to do with the first. A rational person is someone whose ideas are in some way following the same structure as nature and follows logic. And so if yours follows logic to some extent, you are a rational person.
Okay, but how do you know yours follows logic without appealing to your own mind?
I don't know what that even means. Like doesn't matter what you appeal to here. The question is just, can you make a statement that corresponds to reality? If so,
whose reality?
Then you're rational.
Whose reality?
There is no whose reality. There isn't a whose reality. There is only reality.
Okay, so you're in contact with the external world?
External world. Reality isn't just the external world. It's everything. So I am in contact with reality, yes.
Are you in contact with the external reality?
Does that have anything to do with the previous question? Like I'm not following...
Yes, because you adhere to, from watching your videos, you adhere to some Kantian metaphysic. We can only know the phenomenal, not the noumenal. Is that correct?
Sure, but that has nothing to do with my previous statement. So my previous statement was that we can have logic, and we don't need access to the external world to have logic. So it doesn't.
Right, but you're talking about truth corresponding to reality, and I need to know: are you talking about an internal reality or an external reality? If it's internal, okay. But I'm asking if it's external.
It doesn't make a difference to my argument. So my argument is that I can have logic, and the way I can have logic is by saying I exist. And if I have one statement that can correspond to reality, either or, external or internal, makes no difference here, then I have logic. So you're bringing up a red
Okay,
herring.
can
It
you
doesn't matter.
explicitly define reality for me? If I
All
looked it
that
up in
exists.
the Tom Jump Dex, okay, so all that exists. What is all that exists?
How should I know?
Okay, so you don't know all that exists.
Don't need to,
Why?
because I only need to get one statement correct to be rational. I don't need to get everyone correct to be rational.
Okay, how can you know something to be correct if you don't know that there's possibly a defeater out there?
Because I exist. So I exist, and there's nothing in the universe making me not exist, because then I wouldn't exist. Therefore, I can know everything about the universe here, one thing about all of reality. None of it's making me not exist.
Okay, so you constantly appeal to the cogito argument, I exist. I'm asking you, how do you get to some sort of objective, meaningful conclusion that goes beyond Tom Jump? I get that you conclude that there are contradictions, but is it objectively true in all cases that there are contradictions in the Bible?
There's completely different questions there. So the first question was how can I make like a universal knowledge claim? Well, I did that previously. I exist, and nothing in all of reality is making me not exist, because if it did, I wouldn't exist. Therefore,
But
I
you
can
don't
make a
know all
universal claim.
reality.
I do know that in all of reality, there's nothing making me not exist.
In reality is all that exists. So if I translate it
Yes.
and all that exists, nothing is making me not exist.
Yes.
Okay, so why should I hold to your subjectivistic viewpoint and not someone else's down the street or something?
I have no idea what you're asking there. So are you saying it's possible for something to be in the universe that's making me not exist while I'm existing? Is because that
No,
seems to be like the worldview you're espousing here?
No, I'm asking you to get beyond the cogito argument. I want you to get beyond an egocentric picture where everything's subjective. I want you to get out to some metaphysical objectivity to show me how contradictions plague my worldview. Can you do that, or are you stuck in your own phenomenal
Yeah,
experience?
so I already did that. So I already overcame all of the subjective barriers when I said I exist and nothing in all of reality is making me not exist. So now I'm objective.
But how do you know that, though? What are you appealing to
Because
when
I
you make that
exist.
claim? So you're appealing to
I
yourself when you
exist.
make that claim.
Yes, so I exist, and
Okay.
there's nothing in all of the universe and all of reality making me not exist, because if it did, I would not exist. And, well, I exist.
Okay, so everything you're appealing to, every objection is tied to some internalistic, subjectivistic point, from what I'm
Nope.
seeing.
Straw man. So no.
What is
like I just said,
what is the objective tether? Not reality. There's some. Do you acknowledge the noumenal phenomenal distinction?
Again, separate question. So the noumenal phenomenal distinction, for the sake of an argument, I usually grant it for conversation. I don't grant it specifically in the case of Kant, no, because there are things I think we can know noumenally, but it's a different topic. So, but the first question you ask, you keep asking like multiple questions in the same sentence, is what is my objective grasp to reality? I exist.
Yes.
That is reality. That's a part of reality. It's not subjective reality. That's objective reality. My existence is a part of objective reality. There's nothing subjective about it other than the fact that you can't know it. Secondly,
now
almost done.
Okay.
So secondly, I can know that no other part of reality is contradicting that. No other part of all of reality, anywhere, at any point in reality, whether I know anything about it, none of it is making me not exist. So I can know something not only in objective reality directly through my experience, but I can also know something about every other part of reality that it's not making me not exist. So I have objective in both senses of the term grasp here.
How do you? Okay, so you keep using the word I and my and everything is. You're using subjectivistic language. You keep appealing to your private sensations and experiences. If I even grant that you objectively exist, which I do believe, I'm still trying to figure out what's the tether to making some sort of argument, any argument, that has objective and universal applicability besides
I've already answered that like 6 times.
How?
So I exist, and nothing anywhere in the universe, this is a universal statement, nothing in anywhere in the universe is making me not exist. That's a universal claim. So I now have universal knowledge.
Okay. How about this? How do you know you exist?
I experience it. It's a direct experience.
Do you use the cogito argument?
No, the argument is simply a description of the experience. The experience is the knowledge, not the argument.
Okay, so you're experiencing things.
Yes, I am experiencing a silly questions right now.
Okay, and how does a mind experiencing things equate to a self-identified knower?
Those are synonyms. I don't know what you're saying here.
Well, Kant believed the same thing. He said, we can't really know the self exists. It's a regulative principle. So all we can know is that there's a mind interpreting reality, but I'm asking, what's the self-identifying, self-continuing existence? That's Tom Jump. Is it part of a matrix simulation? Is it part of an objective reality? You keep saying objective reality.
Well, none of that matters to my argument. So it doesn't matter if I'm a continuing self-existing thing persistent through time. None of that matters. What matters is the present moment that I am experiencing. So all of my argument, none of it hinges on me continuing to exist in the next 10 minutes.
Okay, so you could have popped into existence 5 seconds ago.
That would be fine for my argument because my argument isn't contingent on that. So all of my argument holds and I still have objective knowledge regardless of whether or not I was created 5 minutes ago or not.
Okay. Apart from I exist, can you give me another argument that's objectively and universally valid and correct?
I could, but I don't need to because it's not a part of my argument that I presented in my opening. So this is the
Okay,
argument.
so if the only argument you can give that is objectively sound is I exist, why should I consider your criticisms of textual contradictions?
Well, I said it's not the only one. It's not the only one. I said that I could present others, but I don't need to because I only need one. If I have one that gives me objective knowledge and gives me an objective criterion
the debate tonight is over, does the God of the Bible exist? So I'm asking you, if you could discredit the Bible and its invalidity with contradictions or whatever, I'm asking for some sort of objective argument that shows that and not some subjective internalistic point of view that Tom Jump is giving me and not some, Bob down the road.
Yeah, clearly you don't know what those words mean. I gave you an objective criterion of knowledge, which is I exist.
Yeah, you exist. And I get that, but I want something more I.
Let me try to explain this to you in more detail because you don't understand it. I exist, and nothing is making me not exist. I now have logic. I have the laws of logic. I have everything in the universe. I have completely objective knowledge. This is more objective than God knowledge. This is above God levels of knowledge here. And now I can use this above God levels of knowledge to assess other claims, to assess things in the Bible. I can say, oh, look, the Bible says plants on day 3 and plants not on day 3. Now those two statements are in contradiction given the logic that is directly follows from I exist and nothing in the universe is making me not exist. So let me just tie this together for you. So I have my existence, which then gives me objective knowledge, which then gives me all of logic, which applies to all of the universe. And then I can apply that to the Bible and say, oh, look, there's a contradiction in the Bible, which doesn't follow the logic of my existing, that follows directly from my existing. That is how it shows your worldview has a contradiction.
Okay, so I'm still not getting how I differentiate why your mind is correct and not someone else's use of logic in mind. Where you've explicitly stated in another video, you don't know where the mind comes from or where consciousness comes from, but that it doesn't really matter because you could still use what you know now as a foundation. Do you still hold to that view?
Yes.
Okay. Do you not see a problem with that?
No, because everything I just said would still apply regardless of where I came from. So if I popped into existence 5 seconds ago,
how do you know
the exact same ways I've explained 10 times. So if I popped into existence 5 seconds ago, or if I was created 13 billion years ago, or if I was created a tenth of a second ago, every single statement I've made prior in this debate would still be exactly true.
How do you know that?
Because logic, the logic of the argument follows regardless, independent of the time at which I was created.
Yeah, but again, I keep waiting for an independent verification. I'm trying to get out of I know you say I exist and that's okay, but that just says you exist. What goes beyond your existence?
You keep skipping the second part. The second part is nothing in the universe outside of me.
How do you know
all of external reality is making me not exist? How do I know that? Because I exist.
And how do you know you exist?
I experience it directly.
Why should, right. So again, we're going from, and this is critics of Descartes say his argument begs the question. It should be thinking's going on, therefore I exist. What's your basis for existing? That I exist?
So clearly you didn't understand the critiques of Descartes. So Descartes' cogito is criticized by, no, you clearly don't, because I actually have talked with academic philosophers about this and explained it many, many times on both ends. The argument that the critiques of Descartes are saying is that the I doesn't give rise to Cartesian dualism, because Descartes used his cogito to try and say there was a soul thingy, and that's the part that fails. Because the I, whatever it is, it doesn't tell us the ontology of the I. Is it a soul? Is it material? Is it a combination of both? We don't know. But yes, we can say the thinker is existing. The thoughts are existing. Everybody agrees on that. Everybody in philosophy agrees on
Fine.
that.
So even if I grant, okay, so you don't know where the mind comes from. You don't know anything external to you. Apparently, the laws of logic.
No, I do know that.
And
I
yet,
do know that. So don't straw man.
okay, fine. You don't know where your mind comes from. You experience your own existence, and then you want to make objective conclusions concerning Scripture.
Sure. Yes, we can do that.
Okay. Now, what's the tether? Is it the laws of logic, or is it your existence?
Again, so as I've explained this like 20 times already, I exist. From my existence, I can get the laws of logic, which are universal, and I can prove they're universal.
But you don't have a foundation for your own mind. You don't even have a foundation for your mind. How do you know it's not just some psychological certainty? See, can you claim epistemic certainty if you don't have a foundation for your epistemology?
Epistemic certainty doesn't matter here. Whether or not I claim to be certain is irrelevant to whether or not it is objectively the case. So certainty, again, is a straw man to the argument. My level of psychological certainty is irrelevant.
Can you verify that it's objectively true?
Yes,
okay, I'm asking about propositions in the Bible. I don't care about if you exist.
Okay.
I'm asking you to verify the two Genesis accounts. I hear that all the time. Can you objectively verify that everywhere throughout time?
I can objectively verify that it contradicts logic, yes, all throughout time.
Okay. How?
The exact same way I explained before. I exist. Nothing in the universe is making me not exist. That's the law of identity that applies throughout all time. I could expand it for you. I can say, nothing throughout all time is making me not exist. Therefore, all time also follows the laws of logic. I can use the laws of logic to apply to Genesis 1 and 2, and they contradict. There you go.
And yet you don't need it. You don't need to know. It doesn't really matter where you came from or your mind or consciousness
Why
comes from.
would that matter?
That's irrelevant.
How could that?
Because that you're lacking a foundation. Because you're starting with some
how
sort
could
of
that possibly make a difference. Like, change the foundation.
Because there could be a defeater.
And make it
it could be a defeater. What you know now.
Yeah.
You don't have a clue where the consciousness comes from.
Okay. So show me any way that there could possibly be a defeater dependent upon how I was created. So suppose I was created in given way X, and you can supply whatever X way you want. Now I exist. Now I think I exist. Now I have logic, and that applies universally, and nothing is making me not exist. Which one of those statements is false based on whatever? Give me whatever defeater you want from however I was created.
Okay, so you appeal to logic to say you don't exist, right? I'm still trying to figure out what your existing means, right? You say I exist, and then I have logic, and nothing's making me not exist. That's what you just said,
right? Well, no, I exist, and nothing's making me not exist. Therefore, I have logic. So logic follows from these things.
What's logic? All three laws of logic.
Those are the laws of logic. Those are, yes, some of them.
Okay. Now, could you be wrong about the laws of logic?
No.
Why?
Because there is nothing in the universe that's making me not exist, which means everything in the universe must hold to this law of logic, identity. So
only identity?
And non-contradiction and the excluded middle in this case, for this one example.
Okay, so you are appealing to existence, to logic, nothing's making you not exist. But we're skipping over the first step of we don't need a foundation for where consciousness came from or anything like that. You're justified in what you believe now.
Well, that's not a step. No one needs that. So this is what I said before.
So Tom, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Tom. If I'm a Christian, and I go to the street and I start preaching the gospel to people, and then some atheist comes up to me and says, "Where did your Bible come from?" And I say, "I have no idea, but I know it's rational and it's true." Am I rational in believing that?
If the contents are rational, yes. Like, who made it is called
according to whose mind, though.
Fallacy.
That's what I keep. Whose mind dictates what's real and irrational. All that nonsense,
but you've skipped over the question I asked you a while ago, which is, why do you think origins matter? Why do you think the origin of where my mind comes from has any contingent dependency on any of the argument I presented?
So, Tom, if I don't know the origin, okay, well, I'm asking questions right now. If I'm the one who's giving the Bible to people and I don't know the origin of it, am I rational in holding to its truths and validity and holding it to it tenaciously? If I don't know where it came from,
contents are yes. Like you keep bringing up a genetic fallacy as if it's not a genetic fallacy. Like, the origin
but Tom,
is this.
For 20 minutes now, I'm trying to get you outside of your subjective self to verify things in the external world. Can you verify that the pages of Scripture are contradictory? Not just I exist and the laws of logic make me not exist, or however you put it. Okay, what's the tether?
So you're contradicting yourself. So that's an objective way to verify that the Bible is contradictory.
How?
I have an objective way to measure logic,
Okay.
which applies.
How do you
objectively.
account for the laws of logic to contingent facts of experience?
They describe things. That's how it works.
Are they separate entities or no?
No, they don't like.
Okay. Are they just descriptions?
Yes, they describe reality. Reality is an entity.
And why are some
They describe
descriptions necessary and some descriptions contingent? What differentiates the two?
What differentiates the two?
Yeah, you'd say laws of logic are necessary, but they're also descriptions. But the sky is blue.
Yeah.
That's not necessary. That's contingent. So what's the differentiating factor between the two?
One
Is it the
applies
human mind?
necessarily, one applies contingently.
Yeah, but how do you know that though? It says who? What's the standard you're appealing to?
What's the standard I'm appealing
Is
to?
it consensus? Is it just your mind? Is it a universal law?
No, some things must be the case, because if they were alternate, it would have different consequences.
Yeah, but
Like,
says
for
who?
example,
I'm asking for a standard. Is that Tom Jump saying that, or is that the universe saying that? Is that the United
it's
States
reality.
Society
It's
saying
reality
that?
itself. It's reality itself saying this.
Whose reality? Your reality or someone else's reality?
There is no whose reality. There is only reality. There's no whose reality.
Okay.
It's just reality.
All right.
All right. That concludes Josh's time for cross-examination. Tom, you're up for a 20-minute cross-examination of Joshua.
Cool. So you said in your, I think it was your rebuttal, you said your imaginary friend tells you that your imaginary friend is real. How does that show it's not imaginary?
I never said that.
I thought you said something pretty close. It was like your God, you start with you and your God, so you and your imaginary friend, and the way you know it's not an imaginary friend is that your imaginary friend tells you.
Well, he's not an imaginary friend, so you're strawmanning my position right at the get-go.
Well, that's begging the question here. So the reason I'm saying this is because you're going to need.
Okay,
someone
well,
to
you're
show
begging
he's
the
not
question
imaginary.
too.
Wait, no, this is that can't be begging the question, because it's the point of the question.
Oh,
is to
yeah.
show you need to wait. No, stop. Listen to the argument. So you need to show he's not imaginary, so that you can say he's not imaginary. Now, if I say he's your imaginary friend, and your imaginary friend tells you he's not imaginary, does that show he's not imaginary? Well, of course not. Obviously, because the whole point of the argument is if that was the case, it would still be imaginary. So you would need some way to differentiate between the case of you have an imaginary friend who tells you he's not imaginary, and you have God who tells you he's not imaginary. So you need a difference between the two cases. That's the whole point. So what way do you have to differentiate between these two?
All right, so I'm going to lay it out. Everyone has to start metaphysically somewhere. And if you want to call that begging the question, that's fine. But the question is how you justify those metaphysical assumptions. And when I said in my rebuttal, in my opening statement, we're talking about worldviews. On my worldview, on my metaphysical esteem, I start with God
Sorry to
and
interrupt.
myself.
Can you answer the question? How do you differentiate between there's an imaginary friend who tells his mind that he exists, and there's a God and he tells you that he exists? How do you differentiate between those two?
Oh, well, that's my worldview. That's what I start with. God's revealed that to me.
Okay, so your imaginary friend has revealed it to you. How do you differentiate between?
Well, see, you keep saying the word imaginary.
Right, because I want you to differentiate between the two examples. So there's one example of imaginary friend says X to Bob.
Okay.
Bob believes
Here, I'll demonstrate
God
it.
tells X to you, and you believe it.
Okay. Here, I'll demonstrate it transcendentally. Okay. Assume I'm wrong. Now, how do you make sense of it, the intelligibility objectively of experience? I don't care about how the way I see it in an egocentric viewpoint or whatever. If you assume Christianity is false, you can't make sense out of anything because you've openly admitted you don't know where your foundations come from, but then you go on to somehow assume the absoluticity of laws of logic.
I think I got your answer. That's a Tukul-Quay fallacy. So if I have 10 axles and 9 of the axles are broken, does that prove the 10th axle works?
No.
Okay, so
you have 10 axles and the 9th one's broken?
No, so if I have 10 axles...
How does that my argument?
Wait. So there are 10 axles. 9 of them are broken. 1 of them we don't know. Does that prove, because the first 9 are all broken, we can prove all the first 9 are broken, does that mean the 10th one must work?
No, my argument is that I have an axle that works, and by definition, every other one is wrong because there can only be one true reality. Yeah. Axle's a bad analogy.
So what I'm asking is to show your axle works. That's the part I'm asking about.
Okay, I'll show it. Again, I'm giving a transcendental argument. How do I prove it? I assume I'm wrong. I'll say, Tom, you're right, and I'm wrong. Now make sense of intelligibility for me without subjectivizing it. In my question period, you've subjectivized it completely.
Sorry, so I got to stop here. So if a guy has the 10th axle, he says, my 10th axle works, and I'm going to prove the 10th axle works because look at all theirs, they're broken. Does that prove his works?
No. No, your analogy is failing because I can demonstrate it.
How?
You know, the 10th guy. See, because in your analogy, all 10 axles can work, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about metaphysical realities. Unless you say otherwise, can only one axle work?
They could all be broken. So I'm not saying any of them could work. I'm saying that we have 10 axles. There are 10 axles on the ground, and we know for a fact the first 9 will not work. They will never work. They are permanently broken. And then there's a 10th one.
Okay.
And you got this 10th one, and you're saying this one works. And the way, and I ask you, okay, so how do you know it works? And you say, well, the way I know it works is I'm going to compare it to the other 9, and the other 9 are all broken. Therefore, mine works.
No. The transcendental argument is not an inductive survey. I'm not going one by one and saying, well, these all suck, so my worldview must be the only one. I'm saying I start with my worldview as being true, just like you start with yours being true and the Buddhist does, and then saying, if you reject my worldview, you can't make sense out of intelligibility. You subjectivize it and go to skepticism.
Okay, so again, so you're saying so again, you're saying, look at all these other 9 axles. All those are broken, and if we go with those, it leads to skepticism. So what is the positive evidence that yours works? You can't use negative evidence. 9 axles doesn't work.
I could go over my opening statement again. Scripturally, how my worldview provides the metaphysical preconditions for intelligibility. It's not like, well, Buddhism's off the list, Islam sucks, Hinduism's not good, atheism's not good, but hey, Christianity's possible. That's not my argument.
No, that's not my argument. That's not what I asked. I don't care about the intelligibility. My worldview doesn't need intelligibility. I don't care about that. What I asked was,
that's self-refuting.
No. Again, this is my argument for your position. You have to answer it. It can't be self-refuting. If it's a question, questions can't be self-refuting. So I asked you, how do you differentiate between you have an imaginary friend and your imaginary friend tells you that he's real, and God tells you that he's real? How do you differentiate these 2 cases? I didn't ask about intelligibility. I want to know how you differentiate imaginary friend said so and God said so.
Are you talking about like schizophrenia?
Sort of.
Like seeing people?
Sort of. So I'm asking you, you claim that you know God is real because God told you. And I'm saying, how do you differentiate that from you have an imaginary friend and an imaginary friend told you?
On God's authority. Imaginary friend, what kind of authority is that? It's subjective. God's authority is objective. And now, if you want to laugh at that and say that's a joke, you're begging the question, I'm just going to keep going at you and say, how do you justify the law of contradiction or fallacies to begin with? You've already subjectivized your experience. So everything that you're laughing at is purely internal.
Well, I already justified it. I already proved you can do that without a God. But
yeah, you've done it subjectively, that's for sure.
No, I proved that objectively. So now you claiming that the reason you can tell the difference between imaginary friend told you so and God told you so is that your imaginary friend is all powerful. So the authority.
You keep using the term imaginary friend. See now, John, if I'm begging the question, so are you, because I'm using the term God as if he exists, and you keep using the term imaginary friend as if he doesn't exist. So if I'm begging the question, so are you. So how do I know God is declaring it not an imaginary friend? It's because God has his own authority.
Arguments work. So okay, I have to back this up and try to explain this to you very simply. So if you say, I have a box, and in the box is a rabbit, and I'm saying, okay, so how do you tell the difference between a box with a rabbit and a box with a lizard? And you say it weighs 2 pounds. I'm like, my box with the lizard weighs 2 pounds, and your box with the rabbit weighs 2 pounds. That doesn't work because they both boxes weigh 2 pounds. So that doesn't differentiate between. Wait. No, that's not how begging the question works. So if you present a criterion and say, wait, stop. So if you present a criterion and say this criterion can tell the difference between imaginary friend and God, and then I can apply it to the imaginary friend case and say it's like, oh look, both of them have that. Then it shows it doesn't differentiate, right? So like if you say 2 boxes.
Yeah. In that case, yeah.
Yes. So if you say the authority of God is what gives you the ability to tell the difference, and then I say the authority of the imaginary friend is what gives me the ability to tell the difference, you realize I can apply that, the word, to either one of them. So you need something more than just you think it has authority, because if you think it has authority, well, obviously a guy with an imaginary friend could think it has authority, right?
So, okay, let me digress a little bit. I'm giving a transcendental argument, okay? So in American and British circles, we want... if you want an answer and you want to... If you that's my argument. If you don't like my argument, then we shouldn't have debated. I mean, if you want me, I'll explain the argument again. It's not empirical, like it's not scientific or anything.
Explain to me how the argument can differentiate between imaginary friend and God. That's the part I'm missing. Explain to me how the argument does that.
by transcendental analysis. Can a schizophrenic person who has an imaginary friend say a comet's going to hit the Earth in 10 years and you better prepare? Does that have the same authority as a God who made everything in the universe? No, he doesn't have the same authority at all. Can this imaginary friend give you revelation?
What authority
No.
here? So I'm not following here. So you think God has authority. Imaginary friend, the guy who has the imaginary friend thinks he has authority. How do you tell the difference?
Because I have the inscripturated revelation of God. What does he have?
The inscripturated revelation of his imaginary friend.
Okay, great. Now tell me how does his worldview account for objective knowledge? Because I can't.
He made up an invisible sky daddy and made up some bad arguments that he thinks applies it, which objectively
okay, well,
don't,
I didn't do any of that, so...
Yes, you did. So we can prove you did, but again, so that doesn't work.
But that's subjective to your mind, not someone else's mind.
No, that's objective to logic and reality. So if that's your argument,
no,
you think that...
Okay.
Prove that. That's your conclusion, is that you can't differentiate between imagination and imaginary friends?
Oh no, I can, because God has given me the transcendentals.
Tell
no imaginary. I've told you, through God's revelation, I have the transcendentals for a human experience objectively. If some dude down the road who's high on drugs gives me some book and says, I wrote this, take it seriously, I mean, I'll indulge him, sure. Now, I'm just going to let it play out and show that it inevitably reduces to absurdity.
Again, you
my
can't
worldview can account for knowledge.
Wait. Again, you keep going back to this reducive to absurdity. That's the argument I debunked before about the 9 axles. You can't say, oh, look, the alternatives reduced to absurdity.
That's not what I'm saying. Okay, so let me. Okay, so if you want to prove a transcendental, there are 2 ways you can do it. You can prove it indirectly or use the lemma method. If I can prove a transcendental indirectly, it's showing the opposite and showing that you have to assume it in order to be true. So to make it easy, the laws of logic necessarily exist, right? You would agree? I mean, that it's just absurd otherwise. Okay, now what if some weirdo came down the road and said, I don't think they exist? I'd say, okay, fine, I'll indulge you. Let's assume they don't exist. But guess what? You just assume they exist and denying it. So that's an indirect method of proving a transcendental.
No, that wouldn't work. Again, the reason that would apply there is you would say, the reason I can show that you're wrong, that the laws of logic don't exist, is that I exist. And I know I exist. And
that presupposes the laws of logic, Tom.
No, it doesn't.
That presupposes you just said your existence, when I question you, is dependent on the laws of logic. And now you're saying,
wrong. Straw man, none of that applies. I didn't presuppose anything. There are no presuppositions in my worldview at all. There are 0 presuppositions. I have direct experience.
You're presupposing you're existing.
No, I'm not. Stop straw manning my position. There are no presuppositions in my worldview. I have a direct experience. I describe that experience. There's no presuppositions. I don't presuppose I exist.
Tom, that statement's self-refuting.
No, it's not. You're confusing the words with the experience itself. You're confusing epistemology and ontology as a basic precept do.
When you say presupposition, okay.
Again, you're confusing the language with the ontology. My experience itself, the words presuppose meaning, obviously. I'm presupposing you understand them, but the experience presupposes nothing. What does my experience presuppose? What is the direct experience I'm having? What presuppositions does that have?
It presupposes the my.
No, I don't. To presuppose something, do you have to have a mind?
Yeah.
Do rocks presuppose things?
No.
Do rocks exist?
Yeah.
So if a rock exists, what is it presupposing?
It doesn't have a mind, so it's not presupposing anything.
Right. So my direct experience, which is a literally existing thing like a rock, has no presupposition.
So you don't have so you have no mind. So you don't have a mind.
No. Try to follow the argument here. So
no,
the
I'm following.
The experience itself, not my understanding of it. The experience itself.
Experience is intelligible without a mind to begin with. You're presupposing the mind and arguing against the mind.
Do worms have experience?
I mean, I guess limited.
Flies, yes. So they have experience, but they don't have a mind. They don't have the ability to really comprehend it, do they?
Well, it depends on how you define the term mind.
Yeah, they can't cognitively recognize their own existence. They can't. They just have an experience and no processing behind it.
They're not self-aware, if that's what you're trying to get at. No.
Sure. So they have an experience, and the experience exists just like a rock exists. It's somewhere out there in the universe.
Yes, but they can't cogitate or anything like that.
So their experience is an existing object, which presupposes nothing, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, but guess what, Tom? You can presuppose something because you have a mind. Can a fly do what you're doing right now, Tom?
You just granted that existence can exist. Your experience can exist without presupposing anything.
No, I get that, Tom, but you have a mind. That's the problem.
That's the whole point of the argument. The mind part isn't the part of the argument.
You're presupposing your mind and arguing that you don't have a mind to presuppose anything.
Stop talking. My argument was that I experience. My ability to cognitively process that is irrelevant to the argument. My argument applies to ants, to flies, to dogs, anything that has a conscious experience.
Okay, Tom.
The argument applies to. You don't need.
You're presupposing other things as well.
What presuppositions exist in an experience?
Okay, the mind, but you disagree. That's fine. Uniformity in nature.
Stop. How is the experience itself, which doesn't have any thoughts, it's just an experience, how does that presuppose a mind exist?
So you don't have thoughts, Tom? You're having thoughts.
Don't deflect. Answer the question. How does an experience, like of a worm, presuppose anything?
Well, it presupposes their existence, but I'm talking about a human mind.
How does their direct experience, which they have no thoughts, presuppose anything? Not the argument.
I'll tell you. It presupposes the uniformity in nature, it presupposes induction, it presupposes laws of logic. Okay, if there's no uniformity in nature, then they just don't exist in 10 seconds, and then they might come back in later.
You're confusing a thing exists with the thoughts required to describe the thing. Again, I've defeated you on that point so many times.
So you're saying you have any presupposition? Presuppositions, Tom, are
zero
epistemic.
Presuppositions in my worldview.
That's for
There are zero presuppositions in my worldview. None.
Presuppositions are epistemic things. Yes, they are.
They're not.
They are assumptions. They are beliefs. Fundamentally held
this is my question.
assumptions.
Time. Stop. You're ignorant of philosophy. We all know that. So going back to my question, what method? Actually, I've already defeated you on the fact that you can't differentiate imaginary friend from God. How do you define justification? Because you said good reasons. That could give like a formal definition of justification. What are the criteria we need for justification?
Not off the top of my head, but I could come back and give you an answer because that really, quite frankly, isn't that important right now.
Wow. Okay, so the whole point.
Unless you're trying to get real analytic. I'm not trying to be analytic here. My argument is not analytic.
I don't need a perfect syllogism here. I don't care about that. The point here, the reason precepts all fail necessarily is because they have no definition of justification. It doesn't exist. They just have an arbitrarily, this feels good to me, this does not feel good to me. So any definition of justification that any precept can come up with, and I've talked with tons about this, is completely arbitrary, and I show that applies to their own worldview, and then they change the definition of justification, and then I show that applies to their own worldview and doesn't solve the problems, and then they change the definition. So what I want from any precept ever is a coherent definition of justification with a set of criterion that shows a God-based knowledge counts as knowledge, whereas other-based knowledge don't. So can you give me, like, ballpark it for me? What is like the closest definition of justification you can, which can give a definition of knowledge that is God-based knowledge that differentiates from non-God-based knowledge?
Well, I could appeal to innate experience like you do, but again, my argument tonight has been transcendental.
That wouldn't be a definition. What is the definition of justification? Give me a definition of justification.
In what context? In my argument or in general?
In presuppositionalism. In presuppositionalism, the reason that God-based knowledge counts is justified. It is a justified true belief, like you said. So God told you, which justifies your belief. What is the criterion of justification that makes this justified, that makes non-God-based knowledge not justified?
I'm not entirely sure to answer that. I mean, it comes from God. God is self-justifying. There's no higher authority. It's kind of like someone saying, logic is self-justifying. You can't, you have to assume logic to deny it or anything else.
You can't use justification, the definition of justification. You need to give like a criterion. What counts as justification? Why is this justified? Just saying it justifies itself is just using the definition of justification in justification.
Well, okay, first, that's your subjective viewpoint because you can't get out to other minds. But second, again, as I've said, transcendental status.
Like every rational, non-dumb human being knows that you can't use the definition, you can't use the word in the definition of the word. Like if we want
but you don't know people. That's how your mind works, Tom. How do you know other minds work the same way?
Every non-stupid person. So instead of
your subjectivistic experience, or do other people exist
in
now?
your subjective opinion.
Okay, let me get rid of
imaginary Sky Daddy.
Okay, hey guys, you guys are talking to each other and it's hard to follow, so let's make sure we are responding. So Tom, go ahead, ask your question, and then Joshua, you go ahead and respond uninterrupted.
What is the criterion of justification? Don't use justification in the definition.
Okay. Simply put, it's the transcendental status of what is revealed to us. Now, if you need me
I
to
don't
go over
understand
that, I
what that
can go
means.
over that. Okay. So there are necessary preconditions that are needed for the intelligibility of human experience. Okay. So if I go back to the imaginary dude who came across the street, he wouldn't give me any necessary preconditions, but God has revealed himself to us, his nature, history, and so forth. And God reflects how he's created the universe vice
Okay,
versa.
sorry to interrupt. I don't understand what is the definition of I don't understand how this is a definition of justification. What is like the definition of justification?
Well, I mean, broadly speaking, it's having good reasons, but that's not the debate tonight, Tom. The debate is if God exists. I'm arguing transcendentally.
How do you determine something is a good reason or not a good reason?
Well, it depends. If it's scientific, you go to the evidence for science, you go to the lab. If it's archaeological, you go to the field. I mean, there are so many different ways you can answer that question.
In the context of this debate, if we want to determine how do you do that? Like what does that mean? Again, you can't go to the axles.
Of the contrary.
Those are the axles. I already debunked that.
No, I'm not appealing to axle 7 to prove axle 10. I'm saying assume axle 10 doesn't work, and now you're reduced to absurdity. That's my argument.
That's literally the axle argument. That's literally saying, oh, look, all of the other options are impossible, therefore mine works. That's literally what impossibility of the contrary means. It is
not an inductive
Those
surgery.
Can't work, therefore mine works. That's what
I'm saying
means.
Okay, explicitly put, I'm saying my worldview, it's impossible for Christianity to be false, because it provides the preconditions for intelligibility.
Yes.
It's a transcendental argument.
So mine is right because all the others are wrong. Yes.
No.
All right, guys. All right, guys. That concludes the cross-examination. So now we're going to go ahead and go to closing remarks, and then we're going to have some Q&A. So audience, make sure you get your questions in for the Q&A. There will be one after this debate. So that said, Joshua, you're up first for your closing, 5-minute closing.
Okay. I want to thank you, Marlon, and Tom for making this debate possible, even though we've been at each other's heads. It's nothing personal, of course. In my opening statement, I said that Van Til has rightfully pointed out that the non-Christian's worldview is riddled with dialectical tensions. And this, I believe, is what we've seen with Tom's argument tonight. So specifically concerning the point of whether reality is deterministic or indeterministic, Tom has had to jump back and forth between the two. See, on the one hand, he says he exists, and that's because of logic, and he can't not exist. So reality is rational. But then you see on the other hand, he has to subjectivize his experience. So it's ultimately irrational. Well, which one is it? If it's both, if there's a subjectivistic aspect and an objective aspect, now the question is, how do you bring these two things together? In my opening statement, again, I said I'm demanding internal consistency and interrelation between all the facts. Arbitrariness is not allowed. You can't appeal to brute fact. How does Tom bring together the subjectivity of his own experience with the objectivity in the external world? How does he know that other minds exist? I mean, yeah, he's really clearly shown how his mind exists, but how does he know that my mind works that way, or his neighbors, or whoever? He has such a metaphysically daunting task on his worldview because everything's reduced to himself, which is a subjectivistic endpoint, foundation point. And subjectivism just reduces to skepticism. My worldview has an answer to these philosophical questions. My worldview provides the transcendentals for human experience. Not subjectively. I'm not appealing to logic in some vacuum and then going off that, or I'm not appealing to my own existence in a vacuum and then going to logic and then going to reality. I have a concrete worldview, a unit that provides the objective preconditions for intelligibility. So far tonight, Tom has only shown that he exists, but he doesn't really have any certitude about anything outside of him. Laws of logic, maybe. I could grant that he has certitude over the laws of logic, but now how does he bring the two things together? How is it that his mind can rationalize logically to begin with? He completely just disregards the foundational aspects of where his mind comes from, where his consciousness comes from, and says, we don't really need that. We have our own mind now, and then we can use the laws of logic. Well, how does he know there's not a defeater out there? Is he going to say because the contrary is impossible, the laws of logic can't fail to be what they are? Well, for all of his criticisms against me tonight, that's a transcendental argument that he's giving for the laws of logic. So if he can understand that, why can't he understand my argument tonight? I'm presenting the Christian worldview as a unit. No truths are excluded. It is all holistic. It's an all or nothing force, Van Til says. So when we traditionally hear the gospel message and we think of eternal death for those who do not embrace Christ as Lord, but you see, Van Til has rightfully pointed out that if one does not embrace Christ as Lord at the outset of their thinking, one dies intellectually. They can't make sense out of experience. At best, you can make sense out of your personal experience subjectively. But then you can never get outside your experience to any sort of brute fact outside. I mean, you could say it's a brute fact, but you can't really know anything outside your experience. It's all internal to you. How do you get from your experience to external reality? Is it logic? Well, how does that work? What's the tether from the phenomenal to the internal to the external? Van Til again says, if you don't start with Christ's revelation, you're reduced to absurdity, and I believe that's what Tom has done tonight. Everything he has said has subjectivized himself. When I ask him, how does he know other minds exist, or how does he know other minds operate the same way, he doesn't really give an answer. How does he know that his own mind, again, and I keep going back to the same question, how does he know that, how is it that his mind can even possess the capability of logical thinking? Why is it that his mind can cogitate and it's not the mind of, a cat or a fly or something? He just leaves these unanswered and then goes on to stipulate that he has answers, that naturalism can explain things better than theism. Well, that's not the case at all. He hasn't explained anything because he's taken for granted the foundational level that he can't even, he's openly said he can't justify to begin with. And that then he thinks, the second story of the tower, if you will, is sufficient enough to go out and make objective conclusions and refute his opponents and come to anything meaningful, and etc. But that shouldn't be allowed. It's arbitrary. And so, again, I reiterate the same point, that the proof that God exists is that without God, you can't prove anything. He is the ultimate precondition for objective knowledge. Tom has not given us any argument for the objectivity of his knowledge, that other minds exist, that every other mind operates the same way. And so long as these questions are left unanswered, we have no right or reason to adhere to what he says. We can just go to someone else arbitrarily. This goes beyond mere philosophical debate, though. These are life and death matters, not just intellectually, but also salvifically. And it is my hope as a Christian that Tom and other non-Christians watching this see the light of Christ and turn to him, not just to their thinking, which is a precondition for knowledge, but also turn to him as their Lord and God to save them from their sins. To reiterate the so beloved words of John, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And then that is my ultimate desire for tonight, to see Tom saved and those watching who are not in Christ. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joshua, for that closing. All right, Tom, you're up for your 5-minute closing.
Thanks, guys.
Start the time when you start speaking.
Yep, thanks, guys. Thanks for hosting. Happy to be on the Gospel Truth, as always. Thanks, Joshua, for showing up. Appreciate the intellectual debate, heated debate, as always, which I appreciate. Very fun. I don't really need much of a closing. I think my statements covered it. They speak for themselves. But I'd be happy to read a few super chats from my end that they asked. Atheist Velociraptor asked, how long does it take you to write your script, Joshua? Are you able to deviate from it? And then Marty Mad Scientist asked, how does the Christian worldview provide us with technology versus Tom's logic-based worldview? If I can just conclude there. Josh wants to answer those, that'd be great.
All right. And all right, so now we'll jump right to the Q&A. Bringing this thing down real quick, and we'll jump right into this Q&A. All right, guys, good stuff, guys. Get ready for some questions here. All right, first question coming at you. This was for Tom Jump. You'll see it pop up on the bottom of the screen. And the question is, let me
It's very hard to read. It's very blocky.
Yeah, I'll read it off. I'm trying to get this thing to come up correctly. All right, read it off. Which of you, I said, would the laws of logic exist if people didn't exist? Question for you, Tom.
Our descriptive languages would not, but they would still accurately describe reality even if humans didn't exist.
All right, Joshua?
Well, again, I keep going back to the differences in worldviews we have. And so Tom has I guess he's a nominalist, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but so he kind of, takes away from the existence of the laws of logic, if you will. But of course, I, as a Christian, would say that they would exist even if we didn't exist.
All right. Next question here, and I forgot my super chat. Thank you for Jungle Jargon for the super chat. Appreciate you. For Tom Jump, do you know what the Table of Nations is?
Nope.
All right. Joshua, do you know what the Table of Nations is?
No.
Sorry, Jungle. Sorry, we couldn't answer your question, man, because I certainly don't know what the Table of Nations is, man. So sorry about that. All right. Thank you for the super chat, though. Appreciate your support. And this question for you, Tom. How do you know you exist? The I in the statement "I exist" presupposes that you exist. Where does the person of Tom come from? God is absolute personality, and thus there is no problem for us. That is not a problem for us.
Again, this is a confusion between the statements and the thing it's describing. Like if I say the sky is blue, is the sky blue because the sentence? Well, no, the sentence has nothing to do with the sky's blueness. The sky's blueness has to do with reality. So when I say I exist, the sentence I exist is describing a thing which exists. There is a thing that I am experiencing, the experience itself. And the sentence, nothing in the sentence matters to the experience itself. The experience exists independently of the sentence. So all the precepts are critiquing the sentence as if it matters to the existence, which it doesn't. If the sentence never existed, the experience would still exist. And God has like the most problems of anything. It completely fails in numerous ways. So saying it's pure personality doesn't work at all.
All right, Joshua.
Yeah, Tom's getting at semantic nitpicking. I'm not sure how far that's going to go. I mean, it's not what Descartes had in mind, at least. I mean, I exist, I think, therefore I am. Well, unfortunately for Descartes, the I is in the premise as well as the conclusion. And so what later critics have said is, well, Descartes, you should have said thinking's going on, therefore I exist. But of course, when you put it that way, it's a horrible argument. So in terms of the way Descartes put it, you could, yeah, it begs the question. However, if you reformulated it into a transcendental argument, it is plausible. So
Just go to the Wikipedia for Cogito. Like everything he said is pretty much wrong. You can just read it sentence for sentence.
Okay.
All right, guys. Yeah, I forgot to tell you guys, 1 minute each for responding and without interruption. All right, this next question for you again, Tom Jump. The audience is hitting you hard, man. In any other possible world, would oxygen be necessary for T Jump to exist? Or would oxygen be classified as an imaginary friend to sustain his being to exist?
Well, I mean, you don't need oxygen to exist. No, like even I think theists admit that there are souls and things that exist without oxygen. So in possible worlds, no, you don't need oxygen to exist.
All right, Joshua.
I think they meant like as a sentient being. Like, I mean, you could exist as a corpse. Would the oxygen be this? I mean, so yeah, in that sense, yeah, you would need oxygen to live and to cogitate. Otherwise, you would exist and be dead. So yeah, I mean, and that's not sure. Tom would probably say, no, we can demonstrate the existence of oxygen, so he's not an imaginary friend. But again, my argument is not empirically demonstrative, and I could be wrong, Tom, sorry, but my argument is transcendental by the impossibility of the contrary.
All right. And here's the next question for T Jump, man. Did you presuppose your worldview was correct when you said that a talking donkey was ridiculous?
No. There are no presuppositions in my worldview.
Joshua?
Okay, well, to clarify the whole thing, because Tom said this in many videos, I watched him. And when presuppositionalists talk about it, we're talking about elementary, foundational, fundamental assumptions about reality, things that are presupposed. So when I go to this debate tonight, I'm presupposing that nature is uniform. I'm presupposing the inductive principle, that I exist, laws of logic, and all the rest. So when Tom says he has no presuppositions, I mean, again, I've tried to point that out. It's just self-refuting. In terms of the worldview centeredness, yes, Tom was presupposing his worldview was correct. Otherwise, he wouldn't be arguing for it to begin with. Everyone assumes they're correct at the outset. Everyone assumes a methodology to defend it, and everyone assumes the conclusion is true. So it is a circle. Everyone reasons that way, and Van Til pointed that out.
All right. And the next question here for you, Tom. What is your argument that the God of the Bible does not exist?
There's no way to show that it's not imaginary. So all things start as imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. And any rational human being is justified in concluding that all things asserted without evidence are inherently imaginary. Therefore, because God has been asserted without evidence, any rational human being should conclude it's imaginary and not real until evidence is presented. No evidence is presented, therefore it's reasonable to conclude it's imaginary. It does not exist.
Joshua?
this is a great example of the many things wrong with Tom's philosophy. One, he's just exposed his presuppositions metaphysically. See, Tom's starting with an egocentric picture and then working outward to find the tough questions, whereas the Christian worldview starts with God's revelation at the outset, at the same time as ours. Second, Tom's assuming the existence of other minds. Not sure how he gets to that from I exist in logic. Third, he's assuming all other minds work the exact same way. I'm not sure how he proves that. Kant wasn't able to prove that either. And on this basis, he's taking these three things for granted and then drawing a conclusion. But see, Tom hasn't addressed his own metaphysical biases and presuppositions because he just flat out denies presuppositions, which is just false. I mean, even auxiliary assumptions in the philosophy of science are acknowledged, even though they might not be the same thing. But everyone acknowledges that there are fundamental assumptions that we take for granted in our experience.
I'm really not a fan of this person who has no idea about my position, keeps trying to describe my position. It's like, I'm not, I don't like this. I don't want to have to correct all of his mistakes all the time. Like, don't describe my position. You don't understand it.
All right, guys. All right. Let's continue on. All right. For Tom, how do you justify your position a God of the Bible does not exist? Empirical short list.
I just went over that. So everything that doesn't have evidence is imaginary. Everything starts as imaginary until demonstrated otherwise. If you don't have evidence, then it's any rational human being should conclude it's just an imaginary thing that doesn't exist.
Josh?
I know Tom objects to my objections, but I mean, he hasn't disproven my objections. Again, his mind thinks that way. What about other people's minds? Do other minds exist? I mean, and then he keeps making these appeals to, any rational person would do that. Okay, well, again, how does he qualify what is and isn't rational? Is it the laws of logic? Okay, well, even if we take the laws of logic, we have to take in other assumptions as well, because the laws of logic are purely formal. We have to take synthetic truths into account as well. So again, Tom keeps saying I keep misrepresenting his position. No, he just hasn't answered my questions. He probably because he just doesn't find them as issues to begin with. And so, ultimately he can't conclude that with certainty, and I'm sure he would admit that. But I just want to expose his metaphysical assumptions.
I can conclude that with certainty, and there are no
subjective.
Okay, guys.
Nope, it's not.
Hey, all right. We good. All right, next one. All right, Tom Jump. Which worldview provides more preconditions for intelligibility, atheism or Christianity?
The same. Like the preconditions for intelligibility are thing able to produce mind that can imagine stuff. Both worldviews provide that. So they both provide all of them.
All right, Joshua?
It's just the same thing. With Tom has a different metaphysical picture than I do, and so we come to different answers. And Tom rejects presuppositions, and I affirm that he does have presuppositions. This is going to be the same thing in this one. Obviously, my argument is the Christian worldview does, and any other worldview reduces to subjectivism and skepticism. So if you have preconditions, sure, I'll grant it at best, but at best, it's subjective.
All right, let me see. I have a couple other questions here. Just they're hitting you hard, Tom, so I'm trying to... they hit you hard, man. Tom, logic presupposes both universal formulas. All A's are B's, and it also presupposes particular applications. All men are mortal. How can you account for logic without the Trinity?
Well, the Trinity is a violation of logic, so you couldn't use the Trinity to account for that. It would actually be more like the paraconsistent logic. But yeah, the reason we can account for logic is because I exist, and I can describe that existence with certain sentences like A equals A, and A does not equal not A. And I can make them universal by saying, oh, look, nothing in the universe is making me not exist. Nothing in any time is making me not exist right now. Therefore, all space and all time, all things in reality, in all times, all follow logic. Because none of them are making me not exist. So I can get logic and justify it that way, just based off of my own experience, very easily.
Joshua?
I love Tom. I'm not trying to be snide or anything, but I want someone to go back and watch his answer here and count how many times he used the words I, me, and my. And again, I just keep getting at the subjectivistic aspect of his philosophy.
All right.
Well, I mean, using the word I doesn't make the thing subjective.
All right, guys. Tom, there's no interruptions at this point, man. The debate is over already, and we're trying to just get through the pound to these questions. That's why I'm trying to answer, and try to get through the questions. And here's another question here, and this is for Joshua. Finally, if intelligibility requires an axle and 9 axles don't provide the preconditions for intelligibility, but the 10th does, wouldn't that then alleviate the problem TJ raised?
So the problem with analogies is that they're not perfect, so there are going to be some inconsistencies here, and I'm trying to stay faithful to Van Til and the transcendental argument. If I'm trying to stay faithful to the argument and the analogy, each axle would represent a reality. And so if Tom wanted to say that all 10 axles would work, then he would be embracing metaphysical contradictions, and no one would do that. That's just weird. But again, I'm coming in with a metaphysical picture, not just, hey, we have to conceptualize that the Christian God exists. And so if the 10th one exists, if the 10th one is the Christian reality, if this is the world God has created and the moon is where it is and all that sort of stuff, if that is how it is, then by definition, that's what it is. There can't be another reality that says, well, the earth exists and it doesn't exist, and those are both true. There has to be one metaphysical reality. And if the 10th one satisfies the preconditions for intelligibility, or whatever arbitrary number, then that's the only true one, unless you want to embrace metaphysical contradiction.
Tom?
Yeah, so the question is correct. If intelligibility requires an axle and there are 10 axles and the first 9 don't work, then yes, that would prove the 10th axle works.
All right. And I think that is it, guys. That's all the questions I have or the audience has there. So thank you guys once again for coming on.
Wait, I got a few super chats for Joshua if he doesn't mind answering.
Sure. What you got? What you got?
James Earl asks, do people in heaven have free will? And if they do, how can this ensure that heaven is the same or worse than what we live now?
I'm not sure what that has to do with the debate tonight. I could say that our wills are the same as they are now, minus the possibility of sinning, but at the end of the day, from a Reformed perspective anyway, God controls all things, and yet we still have a will to do what we please. Like in my opening statement, I said I refuse to put pineapples on slices of pizza. And, no one coerced me to do that.
Okay, and I got one from Atheist Velociraptor. Ask Joshua to define skepticism.
Knowledge is impossible, objectively. I'll grant subjectively, but it's basically...
Okay, how does the Christian worldview provide us with technology versus Tom's logic-based worldview? Marty, mad scientist. I think it means like
I'm arguing
Christianity give us... Go ahead.
Well, if I understand it correctly, I'm arguing for a metaphysical reality of Christianity, right? So if God exists and the universe is how he's created it and how he's revealed it to us, then we have satisfied the problem of induction, of uniformity, the causal principle, laws of logic, how these purely formal principles relate to the contingent world of experience, how they relate to the human mind. I mean, all of these preconditions I'm bringing up. And so if that's true, then the Christian worldview satisfies it. And so I think Tom's just abstracting laws of logic and making that an axiom, if I could use rough language, and doing it that way. But again, I can't keep stressing enough, I'm arguing as a unit, as a worldview. I'm not arguing for isolated principles here and here and here, and now let's try and bring them all together. I'm bringing you with a Christian worldview.
I think he meant like technological, like computers and airplanes and stuff. How does Christianity give any of those that my worldview doesn't, or something?
Yeah, that's basically the answer. Christianity provides the metaphysical preconditions that allow the possibility of building computers. I mean, you're not going to go to a church to learn how to build a computer, obviously. That's not what religion's intended for.
Gotcha. And the last question is how long does it take you to write your script?
About half an hour without revisions.
Cool. Those are the ones I got. Thanks for answering. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Appreciate both of the audiences tuning in to this debate. And I appreciate you guys, man. So, Tom, I think I sent you a gift a long time ago, man, for coming on, man. It was a long time ago. Hopefully you enjoyed that gift I gave you. So, Joshua, I do want to send you a gift, man. I always send gifts to first timers on the Gospel Truth, man. And just token appreciation from me to you, man. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks,
right,
guys. Appreciate the hosting model.
Thank you, Tom.
Joshua again.
Sorry, sorry for being a little hard-headed at times. It's nothing personal, Tom. I think you're a great guy, but it's a debate, so I got to go hard. I got to go all in.
Well, I appreciate it. Like the more combative, the more views we get. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's drama, man. That's what gets the views.
Right. I go full Kardashians.
Yeah, right.
All right, guys. Good stuff. I'll be talking to you guys soon. You guys take care. All right.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks, brother.
See you guys later.
All right, guys.
Bye.
All right, another debate down in the books. All right, good stuff. I appreciate both of the contestants here in this debate. And, see, a lot of people in the chat, they're like, oh, it's been obnoxious, this and that, this is rude. He's being rude. You got to understand something. Well, when there's discussions going on, there's conversations going on, there are going to be words that are shared that doesn't necessarily pump up the other one. And we all expect an intellectual mingling of ideas, right? But we have to have room for there to be some level of aggressive, if you will, interaction. That's the part of a debate. Of course, we want to veer away from the hard ad hominems, right? The ones that are directly insulting to someone on a personal level. We want to stay away from that. But debates are like that, right? Debates are very much like that, where they can get heated, they can get argumentative, and they can get going, because both of these individuals have passionate positions that they're passionate about. So it can get going. But I think the debate overall was good, and I believe that we got some good information out, and perhaps this able to help you out there get some clarification, understanding of positions as well. And perhaps the argument from Tom, if you're a precept or evidentialist as a Christian, you can sort of sharpen your tool shed, your bag of tools, right, in order to prepare for arguments against Tom. And perhaps you could glean from Joshua and say, hey, this argument wasn't that good, or this argument could have been better approached, so that's what it's all about, right? I mean, getting better at what we do, right? And then the overarching goal of this platform is obviously to glorify God through debate, and I think that we have done that today. All right, and I just want to thank you guys once again for always being ready and diligent to tune in to the Gospel Truth. And if you're a newcomer to the Gospel Truth and you've never been on this platform, I do encourage you to subscribe and hit that notification bell if this debate was pleasant. And if you have viewed other videos on this channel and you feel that it's worthy of a subscribe, please do that. Don't hesitate. Please do that. I do appreciate it for your supporting of the ministry. That said, I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate everyone for tuning in today, and I have a bunch of debates coming up here in the future, so be on the lookout for those debates. All right, I really do appreciate you. Once again, I'm out of here. Take care, and God bless. Go.